what we challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:12 p.m. in, yes, very cold, very icy, really, really seriously sub-zero temperatures here in Budapest. Lots of ice on the roads, lots of, you can slip, hurt yourself. So, not at all appealing as you might have thought. However, on a more positive note, thank you everybody who has joined me. Welcome to the Tuesday night live stream. And there's a few things that we can talk about. And the first thing is obviously we're in Davos week, to which I haven't been invited. And everyone is obviously talking about President Trump, who will be soon on his way. And I think he'll be giving his presentation in Davos tomorrow. And the media are doing their usual thing of hysteria, 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 all on the absolutely ridiculous, stupid subject of Greenland. And we're getting this, everyone's getting very worked up about this, and no one's really answering, like, what do you care? What does Greenland, and whether Denmark owns Greenland or doesn't own Greenland, what the hell does it matter? No one's given the matter any thought whatsoever in all the years. I mean, I've been alive for quite a number of years. I don't remember anyone ever discussing this. I don't think Danes have spent any time at all discussing it, but now suddenly this new issue, this horror upon horror, that President Trump is going to take Greenland away from Denmark. Now, as I said before, borders change, and there are no immutable borders, and especially. Todd 5562 said McClown looked like an idiot wearing sunglasses during his speech. Yes, he did look like an idiot. That's his new look, the sunglasses. I still don't quite know what exactly is his eye problem that he has to keep his eyes hidden by sunglasses. It sounds like, I don't know. It sounds like he got a wallop in the eye and so on. So, but just going back to Denmark, it simply is of no significance whatsoever. The population of Greenland is 55,000. In other words, it's a small town somewhere in Europe. It's just that's the sum and substance of the population. Denmark has been one of the most vocal, most ferocious of the European contingent of Russophobes. Mette Frederiksen, and we talked a lot about her on the Gaggle long before the whole Greenland issue came up, was always shrieking about the threat to Denmark emanating from Russia. Remember all the drone scare, which was from a couple of months ago. Oh, we're inundated with drones, the drones. Well, I don't have any evidence that they're coming from Russia, but take it from me, they're coming from Russia. And so she was repeatedly doing this. And now the new line is, oh, well, all this Russian threat. No, there's no Russian threat to Greenland. No Russian threat whatsoever. All lies by Trump. Oh. So apparently this, which is a nice strategic piece of real estate, and you would think if the Russians were threatening Denmark or Luxembourg or I don't know, Portugal, you think if they were threatening those countries, and we were told that they were, you would assume that Greenland would be very much within their sights, because Greenland's a lot easier to take than Portugal would be. Yeah, so Akhmadovich says Lavrov said today Greenland for the US is the same as Crimea for Russia. Yeah, he said that. And of course, Lavrov, um, I mean, that's not, the analogy isn't quite right, because of course, Crimea is of great historic and cultural significance to Russia. Greenland isn't for the United States, other than maybe the strategic importance. But the principle is the same, which is, well, you need a piece of land. It matters to you, and and ultimately, you can take it the nice way, or you can take it the hard way. So, but it's going to happen now. Um, I mean, in the case of Crimea was I think Russia's case is, I think, rather stronger, and I'm not really saying at all that Trump's case on Greenland is a particularly strong one, but neither is Denmark's. Yeah, they've been there, they have legal right of possession, but that doesn't mean anything. The European colonial powers also had legal right of possession to the territories that they took in Africa. I mean, no one said, "Hey, well, there's something illegal about taking this piece of territory." No, it was everything was legal, everything was above board. They went there, they occupied them, and set up government and so on. And so that was that. There was nothing illegal about it. You could argue it was immoral, but there was nothing illegal about it. And then they gave up their colonies. So there's nothing so terrible about that. And when the European states gave up their colonies, there was plenty of people who were alarmed at the time. My God, what's going to happen? The Europeans will be impoverished and so on. No, they were not impoverished. I mean, the world moved on. They no longer had their empires. So Denmark's claim is, well, they have this historically, that they were there. They saw this, the first to land there and whatnot. Doesn't matter. Absolutely doesn't matter, because at any time, new claims will arise. So the other day, I gave the example of Hungary, that just 100 years ago, 100 years ago, was 3 times the size of Hungary today. Right? It lost its territory. Hungarians are still very upset about it. A hell of a lot more upset about it than the Danes would be over Greenland. Because after all, how many Danes actually go to Greenland, never visit Greenland? So that's it. But Hungary lost 2/3 of its territory, and there wasn't very much the Hungarians could do about it, because it was decided upon by the Allied powers at the Paris Peace Conference, and then of course it was subsequently made into international law at the Treaty of Trianon in 1920, and that's it. And the territories that Hungary lost hurts the Hungarians very deeply. I mean, it really was a very emotional subject for them, because, of course, they lost Transylvania, and of course, they lost their outlet to the sea, and they even lost territory to Austria, which was a real painful insult to the Hungarians, because after all, it was the Austrians, far more than the Hungarians, who had provoked World War I, but Austria still managed to get a chunk of Hungary. So that happened, and why did it happen? Well, the Allies could dictate the terms, and the Hungarians had nothing to say about it. And then, of course, an example more recently was the seizure of Kosovo. No one said, "Hey, this is an integral part of Serbia. You can't do anything here. This is Serbia. This is the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. was the defining moment of Serbian history. The Serbs have a very emotional attachment to Kosovo. They have all the churches there, all the monasteries. I mean, the whole place is just consecrated um, um, of Serbian religious symbolism. Nope. The whole thing, the whole kit and caboodle was taken away from Serbia, and the Serbs were told to shut up if they know what's good for them. I don't remember the Danes saying anything about that. I don't remember any major European statements. On the contrary, the Europeans have been telling the Serbs, "You better stop complaining about this. If you know what's good for you, if you want to join our little club, you better stop complaining." In each of these cases, the Serbs had a much stronger case on Kosovo than the Danes have to Greenland, and incidentally, all of these the Danes, of course, are all denouncing Russia for taking Crimea. Again, the Russia's case on Crimea is, of course, much stronger than is the Danes to Greenland. I mean, Crimea was a key part of Russian history, Russian culture, and everything. So that's an emotional thing. None of that exists for the Danes. Now, the remarkable thing is that you got the media, which is getting hysteria. Part of it is, of course, whenever it's anything to do with Trump, and so if Trump says A, then of course it must be B. And so I just watched CNN a moment ago, and they have Ursula von der Leyen. Suddenly she's lionized as this heroic figure, standing up for international law. International law. Now remember, these same creatures, these absolute disgusting creatures of the Europeans, the ones who are now bloviating about Denmark and Greenland. 2 years, they witnessed Gaza being leveled by Israel. And, occasionally they mumble something, not very happy about it. Not unhappy by it, but not quite, not happy. They never expressed any emotion the way they are over Greenland. And even though the Greenlanders, if they were taken on board aboard by the United States, they would be very well looked after. Right? And after all, the Americans are offering a very large chunk of change, so the Greenlanders are going to be well looked after, and well remunerated for doing nothing, just simply being on this piece of property. But the media presented this as this is a horrific, a terrible violation of international law. Well, just over the past year, we had the unprovoked bombing of Iran, in which the United States took part, and the Europeans generally were approval. The same people today indignant over Greenland. Well, they approved of the bombing of Iran, completely unprovoked. Remember, unprovoked. And then, of course, we had a couple of weeks ago the seizure and abduction of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. And again, the Europeans generally have been approving. They said, yeah, he deserved it. So therefore, it's just not a very convincing argument. And then, of course, we can go back other things like the bombing Yugoslavia in 1999. No UN Security Council mandate there. Violation of the North Atlantic Treaty. Violation of UN Article 2. And the Europeans are still very proud of what they did in Yugoslavia. And then, of course, we had bombing of Libya in 2011. So all of that, all of these violations of international law, all of these um, uh, contempt, contemptuous treatment of international norms, sovereignty, territorial integrity. That no one cared about that. And when they talk about, oh, it's really all up to the Greenlanders. The Greenlanders must decide these things. The Greenlanders. Um, well, they if if you're going to go down that path, that it's up to the people themselves. In other words, you're going to go for the national self-determination simply because you think the national self-determination will go for Denmark, and it seems like it's going to go for Denmark. Then, of course, you have to apply that same principle. That's the point about principles. Principles have to be applied across the board, otherwise they're not principles. So then you would have to apply that same principle to the people of Crimea, who also voted overwhelmingly to join the Russian Federation. You would have to apply that to, yes, the people in the Donbass who also voted to join the Russian Federation. You would have to apply that to the Serbs of Bosnia and Herzegovina who want out. They don't want to stay in the this artificial state of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So so that and then of course you got others. You got the Russians who live in Transnistria. They don't want to be a part of Moldova, and particularly with Moldova mumbling about how they'd like to unite with Romania. So the case that the Europeans were shrieking is really a very flimsy one. And the Europeans are kind of hoist by their own petard because they haven't really respected any principles of territorial integrity, national self-determination, international law, adherence to UN Security Council resolutions. They've systematically ignored all of that. They're not in a good position now to be complaining about President Trump. And that's the thing. Trump knows this, which is why Trump is kind of treating them with such disdain. So, it's a kind of a, and the media, as I say, the media just again bloviate as they always do. They always get worked up about what the latest Trump outrage. Now, as I've said before, the Europeans, because they made the decision to wage this proxy war against Russia. Somebody says Schadenfreude doesn't justify barbaric behavior. It's not Schadenfreude. Not Schadenfreude. Understandable by some would enjoy what's going on with Denmark and America, but surely we must oppose America in all cases against people who deserve it. No. It's not Schadenfreude. It's a matter of principle. This is, the states that have systematically ignored international law, that have used violence and approved of violence against others, are not in a position to start invoking international law in defense. They basically when you've already shown contempt for international law, when you have shown how eager you are to use violence yourself against others, you can't then present yourself as the victim of aggression. He who lives by the sword dies by the sword. So absolutely, this is nothing to do with Schadenfreude. I don't care about Denmark. So And so, America is, it has a case for security. Is it a compelling case? I don't know. I mean, they seem to have made a reasonable case. Denmark's case is not a reasonable one. Denmark's case, well, we've just had it for a few hundred years. We haven't done much with it. And so we should have it because we had it for a few hundred years. Well, that's not much of a case. And therefore, it's not going to prevail against a much stronger case, which is an inevitable product of the militarized, hysterical atmosphere in which we live, which is, well, Russia and China are huge threats. And since the Arctic is going to be the battleground of the future, then it makes sense that that Greenland will be a strategic battleground of the future. That's a reasonable case. It's a stronger case than Denmark's, just because, well, we've been there for a few hundred years and no one has bothered to challenge us on it. So we should go on being there for a few hundred more years. But, so what happens? He said, what happens if America continues to behave this way? Well, I don't know. What happens when anyone behaves unreasonably? You're going to have to figure out a way of dealing with it. One thing you can't do is somehow invoke some international law and say, well, that's going to stop America. And it never has in the past. The stronger states will always take what they feel is they're entitled to. They can at various times decide to waive their rights. They can decide that they don't want to exercise their power. Okay, but they just volunteer for this. Ultimately, they're able to do what they can do because that's the way of the world. And it's and somebody said here, America's been behaving badly for a very long time. Exactly. I mean, why are we talking about this? I mean, it's like, in comparison with all the things that the United States has done, when we go, we don't even have to go through all the coups, assassinations, invasions, bombings, and so on over the years. This is very mild stuff. I mean, they're offering money. I mean, this is just they're offering money to the Greenlanders. There's only 55,000 of them, and say, well, just hey, we're giving you some money. You're gonna have you have money to play with. No one is kicking you out of your territory, unlike other cases, which we can come to in a moment, over the Chagos Island. And somebody says, why shouldn't Argentina start another war, take the Falklands? Well, I'll tell you why. Because Argentina is not strong enough. Argentina had a reasonable case, incidentally, for the Falklands. But, Argentina decided to fight against the United Kingdom, which is, after all, is a major power, a major global power. I mean, it's not on the same level as the United States, but it's much stronger than Argentina. Argentina made a fatal miscalculation. So, yeah, I mean, a lot. Why doesn't A do something? Well, I guess it can do it. I mean, when you say, well, why doesn't, what if China does this and blah, 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 because of that? That's not the way the world works. I mean, China or the United States act in accordance with what is in their interest and what will serve them at any particular moment. They're not doing it because they're thinking about international law. Say, well, is this in accord with international law? No, that's not what they think about. They think, well, what can I get this done? If I can get this done, then I will do it. If I can't, if this provokes a serious reaction, then we'll do. I mean, so like when people say, "Oh well, we have to resist Putin in Ukraine because China might then do whatever in Taiwan." Well, Whether China does whatever in Taiwan is going to be dependent on how China sees the global constellation of forces and what its chances are of prevailing. And I think China has not done what is done because for an obvious reason that China doesn't know how the United States would respond. But it's nothing to do with international law because in many ways on Taiwan, international law does favor China to a certain extent. But that's not what decides what China is going to do. China will act according to the appropriate what's appropriate to China. So it's not about international law in the same way that the United States doesn't think about international law. It thinks about what is in its interest and you weigh up your costs and your benefits. Every action is there costs and benefits. Now, in the case of Greenland, I think Trump has come to the conclusion that the benefits of taking Greenland outweigh the costs. He may be wrong about that, but that's his calculation. And the United States has always made that calculation, and that's it. Anyway, I'm not going to get into a whole thing with on this. The point here is that the decisions that great powers make are always based on their national interests. It's not based on any international law. So just because one country does this, another country can do that. No. The United States can take Greenland or not take Greenland, but that doesn't apply to anyone else. I mean, that's it. And since the Europeans themselves have adhered to that very principle, they adhered to that principle when they supported the bombing of Libya, when they supported the invasion of Iraq, when they've generally been quite supportive of what Israel is doing in Gaza, means they themselves accept that principle. Well, then that's the principle. Those are the rules of the game, and Europe has to live with it. Anyway, let's take a look at what Trump has been saying, and here we have he sent out this truth earlier, and here he sent out this as essentially this is a private message sent to him by Mark Rutte earlier in the day, and so this is a private message that Rutte sent to him. And Rutte writes, "Mr. President, dear Donald, what you accomplished in Syria today is incredible." So what they're talking about here is this agreement that's been signed by, Giuliani, the ex-ISIS figure in Syria, who runs Syria. And basically, the Kurds have once again been, quote, betrayed, unquote, and they are forced to come to a deal with the authorities in Damascus. And, the Kurds look to the United States. Hey, you used us a few years ago to fight against ISIS, and now you have abandoned us because you've decided it's more important for you to maintain relations with Giuliani. So here is an example, one example of many in which we show the cruelty and callousness of the United States. The United States used the Kurds to fight against Bashar al-Assad. I mean, ostensibly was doing it in order to fight against ISIS. But in reality, the Americans used the Kurds essentially to carve out a piece of territory in Syria which became a no-go area for the government of Bashar al-Assad. So all the oil fields were under Kurd control, all the wheat fields were under Kurd control, and the United States did this because they wanted to prevent um, the Assad regime from consolidating its power in Syria. And the Kurds were used for that. And I guess the Kurds thought, hey, this is nice. We're going to have a nice time. We've got the Americans sponsoring us. Well, now things have changed. The Americans have decided that Giuliani is more important to them than the Kurds are. So he switched and said, well, to the Kurds, you have to accommodate. You're going to have to basically surrender to the government in Damascus, and that's what has happened. And this, what would on the face of it be a betrayal, is, however, hailed by Mark Rutte, and as we'll see, by Macron. Oh, this is great. So this shows you the high moral values and the high principles that govern the rule of the European leaders. So, hey, it's more important now to be in with Giuliani. We're abandoning the Kurds, and the Kurds have got to get with the program. Anyway, so that was Rutte. What you did accomplished in Syria today is incredible. So the Americans were the ones who pushed the Kurds to accept this deal. And then he says, I will use my media engagements in Davos to highlight your work there in Gaza and in Ukraine. I am committed to finding a way forward on Greenland. Can't wait to see you. Yours, Mark. Isn't that touching? Can't wait to see you. That's so sweet. So Trump sent this out just to show, hey, they're not all against me. Some Europeans like me. And then Trump sent this out again. It's a private message from Macron to Trump, and it says, "My friend, mon ami, we are totally in line on Syria." So there you see again, Rutte, Macron, they're on Syria. Yeah, we basically told the Kurds to shove it. I know we promised them that we're going to have these oil fields and these wheat fields, and they're going to have an autonomous government in Syria. Yeah, we told them all this, but they were just lies. Yeah, we told them in order to keep them online to fight Bashar al-Assad. But now we're not fighting Assad anymore. We're supporting Giuliani, and therefore we told the Kurds that you're not going to have your own self-government. You're not going to have the oil fields. You're not going to have the wheat fields. So it says, we are totally in line on Syria. We can do great things on Iran. I don't know what he means. Like, what are these great things they're going to do on Iran? I do not understand what you are doing on Greenland. Oh, so he doesn't understand. I understand it. I mean, it's very strange. Macron, he seems to, he seems to understand what Trump is doing on Syria. He seems to understand what Trump is doing on Iran, which incidentally are far more baffling, particularly in Iran. I mean, I'm having difficulties understanding what exactly he's doing on Iran, whereas I have no problem understanding what he's doing on Greenland. I think that's very straightforward. I do not understand what you are doing on Greenland. Let us try to build great things. I can set up a G7 meeting after Davos in Paris on Thursday afternoon. See, now this is a problem because the way they had it earlier, that there was going to be an emergency meeting of the European Council to discuss the united European response on Greenland. And now Macron is offering a G7 meeting, so they're not going to be able to join this European Council meeting. I mean, I guess you could, this is the problem with double booking. Um, so I guess some of the people who attend the G7 meeting, um, well, yeah, they might be able to do online, attend also the European Council meeting. It's tough when you have a very active social life. So I can set up a G7 meeting after Davos in Paris on Thursday afternoon. I can invite the Ukrainians. Why do the Ukrainians have to be there? I can invite the Ukrainians, the Danish, the Syrians. Right? Why do the Syrians have to be there? And the Russians. Why do the Russians have to be there? So that seems like it seems to be a somewhat unfocused meeting. So Ukrainians, Danish, Syrians, and the Russians in the margins, and then let us have dinner together in Paris together on Thursday before you go back to the U.S. Okay, well that's would be pretty nice. I mean, dinner in Paris is usually pretty good. Okay, so that's Emmanuel, and then Trump sends out another truth. So he sends out these, basically these direct messages, private communications that he's publicized. And now this is not a private communication. This is Trump lashing out at the UK, a very, very special ally. So he says here, shockingly, our brilliant NATO ally, the United Kingdom, is currently planning to give away the island of Diego Garcia, the site of vital US military base, to Mauritius, and to do so for no reason whatsoever. There is no doubt that China and Russia have noticed this act of total weakness. These are international powers who only recognize strength, which is why the United States of America, under my leadership, is now, after only 1 year, respected like never before. The UK is giving away extremely important land in an act of great stupidity, and is another in a very long line of national security reasons why Greenland has to be acquired. Denmark and its European allies have to do the right thing. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So now what he's talking about here is these Chagos Islands that were part of Mauritius. And so when the British granted independence to Mauritius in 1965, they took away these islands and made that, I think, something like the British. Oh God, I think the British Indian Territory or something like that. Now, so that was 1965. So basically, and on this British Indian Territory, or whatever it was called, they built this island with the Americans. They built this Diego Garcia, and this became a very big military base for the Americans. Of course, the indigenous population was moved out. Hey, I mean, we're building an island here. We're building a military installation here. So that was the local population. Boom, picked up, boom, threw them out. Nothing like that, incidentally, is being threatened in Denmark and Greenland. The Greenlanders are going to be able to stay on, and they'll have some money in their pocket. So these inhabitants of the Chagos Islands, they got a rough deal. No such rough deal is being offered to the Greenlanders. But anyway, so that was in '65, but ever since then, the Mauritius has been demanding that the return of the Chagos Islands. And then there was the ruling. The International Court of Justice issued a ruling saying Mauritius is entitled to these islands, but it was a non-binding ruling, so the British could ignore it. But anyway, the British, for some reason, decided, okay, well, we will give ownership, we'll hand ownership over to Mauritius of the islands, including Diego Garcia. However, Mauritius will be obliged to offer a 99-year lease to the British. And for that, the British will pay whatever it is, 100 million quid a year. I don't know, I think, for the lease. And so that was negotiated by the Tory government, and then the and then Labour continued with it. And so the Americans at first approved of this. So Biden approved of this, and then Trump initially seemed to approve of it as well. But now, as you can see by this truth, he's kind of really pissed off. He's saying, "No, this is a lousy deal. This is Diego Garcia. We're not going to hand over ownership of Diego Garcia to Mauritius, yet another one of these shithole countries who are aligned with China." And he's saying, "Hey, these are the British are really stupid in signing a deal like this. So I'm not going to take lectures from the British," which is what he's saying here, on Denmark and Greenland. No, on the contrary, I want ownership. No leases. Now, as I said earlier, if you're going to whip up hysteria about Russia, the threat from Russia, then I think it's perfectly reasonable. Then you say, well, yeah, I mean, if Russia is this huge threat, which is what these governments, these European governments, far more than the United States, the European governments are the ones who say day and night, all of them, Kaja Kallas, Ursula von der Leyen, Macron, Starmer, Merz, all of them, day and night, say that Russia is an overwhelming, existential, global threat. Well, if that's your position, then you say, well, we can't hand over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. I mean, what kind of resistance is Mauritius going to apply if Russia starts putting pressure on Mauritius for the Chagos Islands? What kind of resistance is Mauritius likely to put up against China? So you see the problem here. I mean, if you're going to go down this path, if Russia and China are this threat, then, hey, you can't start giving islands up. And as I said earlier, if Russia and China are such a huge threat, then absolutely you need to have Greenland in your pocket. Greenland has to be in our column. You see, this is where the problem arises. And there was an article today, maybe I have it on one of the slides, that because Lavrov gave this news conference, or somebody already referred to this news conference today. So Lavrov said, we have no ambitions for Greenland. And then this was used in one of the stories, maybe it was in the Washington Post, this was used by the reporter, the Washington Post reporter. Ha ha! See, Trump is lying. He is lying. Russia has just admitted that they have no interest in Greenland. So hysterical have the media become that now they're willing to accept something that would be anathema to accept Lavrov's claim, we have no interest in Greenland. So now you're going to use Lavrov to refute Trump. That's where this lunacy has led us. And anyway, let's go on for a little bit more with this story. So just, Todd says, Diego Garcia hosts a key U.S. military raid. Britain is trying to pay to give it away. Well, it's not giving it away. It's basically what it's doing is it's the ownership of Diego Garcia will be passed to Mauritius, but the British will pay lease, a 99-year lease. British are going to pay for it, and it's a 99-year lease that, in theory, is automatically renewable. So it's not quite like Hong Kong. I mean, Hong Kong was just a 99-year lease, and the 99 years eventually ran out. So in this case, it'll be 99 years, and they the British will take it over. Okay, where is this? Is this where I am? Yes. So that was and then Trump sent out another truth. No single person or president has done more for NATO than President Donald J. Trump. If I didn't come along, there would be no NATO right now. It would have been in the ash heap of history. Sad but true. President DJT. And then here, this is an AI generated image. Trump planting the US flag on Greenland. And there you can see he's accompanied by Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance. And then another thing that he sent out, also AI generated. So this is the picture from last October when the European leaders sat at the headmaster's desk. They all had all their chairs in front of headmaster as they pleaded with the headmaster that he's got to stay the course with Ukraine. And so there they are. They're sitting there, eagerly listening to the words of the president. And there you can see the map of North America, the United States. Above the United States is Canada. But look what's happened to Canada. Canada is now covered with the stars and stripes. So there's Trump explaining things to the Europeans, and he's showing their Canada with with the stars and stripes. Anyway, then Trump sent out another truth. I had a very good telephone call with Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO. So he this time he didn't put in that facetious, the highly respected Secretary General of NATO. I agreed to a meeting of the various parties in Davos. As I expressed to everyone very plainly, Greenland is imperative for national and world security. There can be no going back. On that, everyone agrees. The United States of America is the most powerful country anywhere on the globe by far. Much of the reason for this is a rebuilding of our military during my first term, which rebuilding continues at an even more expedited pace. We are the only power that can ensure peace throughout the world, and it is done quite simply through strength. So that's an obvious threat. It's saying, well, we are by far the strongest power in the world, and ultimately you really can't defy us. And certainly Denmark is in no position to defy us. So that is making it clear, we're going to take it, but we can do it the nice way. We can offer you a nice dollop of money, or we can just simply take it. But we are going to do it. It's just that Denmark is not really used to this kind of treatment. This is the treatment that's usually doled out for, Serbia or Iraq or Libya. They get this sort of treatment. Denmark, is part of the exclusive club. We don't get treated like this. Ursula von der Leyen, geopolitical shocks can and must be an opportunity for Europe. So this little dictator of Europe, this unelected figure in Europe, she now sees this. Well, this is fantastic. This is an opportunity for Europe, and I will be the leader of this Europe, this Europe as a great global power. The seismic shift underway makes it both possible and necessary to build a new European independence. So we're now talking about European independence. From security to the economy, from defense to democracy, Europe is gathering speed. And so that she's the independence, and now even the Times is you know, kind of finds the whole thing rather amusing, because Trump is just, even the Times realizes Trump is really trolling the Europeans. He's kind of winding them up. And so the New York Times, Trump heckles Europe before heading to Davos. As European leaders try to engage with the American president over Greenland and the future of Ukraine, he's mocking them as weak. And President Trump and his entourage will be in Europe this week, and they are showing their contempt. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent already hobnobbing with elites at the World Economic Forum in Davos, so he's part of the advanced party. He's in Davos. Had a sharp retort when reporters asked him about European leaders' efforts to block Mr. Trump from seizing Greenland. What was his sharp retort? I imagine they will form the dreaded European Working Group, Mr. Bessent said, calling it their most forceful weapon. That's painful. That's hurtful. I imagine they will form the dreaded European Working Group. It's their most forceful weapon. And it's no secret that the president and his aides view Europe as weak, ineffectual collection of nations dominated by liberal leaders and tangled in bureaucracy. His administration's official national security strategy released last month said Europe had lost its civilizational self-confidence and amid a failed focus on regulatory suffocation, but rarely has the mocking been so overt. And Mr. Trump's heckling has troubled European leaders, many of whom are hoping to communicate with him on the sidelines of the Davos meetings. Leaders from across the 27-nation European Union will also gather in Brussels on Thursday evening to discuss how to respond to the latest threats on Greenland. But that's a bit of a problem, as I said, because Macron wants to have a G7 meeting in Paris at the same time and dinner with Trump. So I don't know how they're going to arrange the schedule. And then here we have the Washington Post. Trump jabs European leaders over Greenland as Davos becomes emergency summit. This is the emergency summit. And then it says here, President Donald Trump's demands to take over Greenland, reiterated in an overnight barrage of social media posts, are transforming this week's annual gathering of the global elite into an emergency diplomatic summit, as European leaders prepare to use the president's arrival here Wednesday to de-escalate the spiraling crisis. And then he quotes here the Trump truth. And then in response, the UK government said it would never compromise on our national security, and noted that the decision had been publicly supported by the US and other allies. Well, as I said earlier, yes, it's true that Biden had supported the decision to return the Chagos Islands, and Trump had also seemingly supported that. But now they've changed their minds. Well, that happens. It's no crime, to change your mind. The deal secures the operations of the joint US-UK base in Diego Garcia for generations, with robust provisions for keeping its unique capabilities intact and our adversaries out. So that's their reference. But Trump has already made clear that he's not interested in leases. He doesn't trust leases. He's a real estate guy, and he says, what we need is ownership. Anyone can mess up a lease at any time. Anyway, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on Tuesday morning criticized Trump for violating a trade deal reached last year. So another, broken promise to avert a tariff war by threatening to impose punitive levies on countries that oppose the takeover of Greenland. Von der Leyen vowed an unflinching, united, and proportional response. Note the emphasis on proportional response. And then And then von der Leyen being very reflective. Nostalgia will not bring back the old order. If this change is permanent, then Europe must change permanently too. It's time to seize the opportunity and build a new independent Europe. So she's getting very excited. She's going. This is the new independent Europe, and she's going to be the president. I'm going to be the president of this new independent Europe, and I don't need no stinking term limits. I'm just going to be president for life. The tension among NATO allies may create an opportunity for Russia. So this is the point. It's an opportunity for Russia. So it's never good, as I said, never good when you start bringing up Russia, because the more you bring up Russia, the more you strengthen Trump's case. Trump is justifying all of his threats and his seizures on the ground that there's a Russian threat. So the Washington Post agrees there's a Russian threat. So if there's a Russian threat, well, we can't, dawdle. We can't dilly-dally. We need to take action now. So Russia, which has not been invited to the World Economic Forum since its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, but this year, Kirill Dmitriev, this is and the Kremlin's top negotiator on Trump's proposal to stop the war, is in Davos. So Dmitriev, of course, is in Davos. Where else would he be? Where he is expected to meet the White House envoy Steve Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. And then this is it. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov appeared to stoke the tensions between NATO allies on Tuesday morning, saying Greenland is not a natural part of Denmark and warning that Iceland, a NATO member, could be taken next. Lavrov said Russia and China have no plans to seize Greenland, undermining. You see, Lavrov is now undermining one of Trump's rationales for taking Greenland, which he says is needed for national security reasons. So suddenly, we believe what Lavrov says. Just read this sentence again. Lavrov said Russia and China have no plans to seize Greenland, undermining. So they accept as true Lavrov's claim just in order to score a debater's point against Trump, undermining one of Trump's rationales for taking Greenland. And here's Kaja Kallas. Greenland belongs to its people. No threat or tariffs will change that. Our response must be to remain calm, hold our ground, and act in unity. Now, one has to keep in mind that Kaja Kallas couldn't care less about Greenland. She absolutely couldn't care less about Denmark. I mean, she just doesn't care about any of it. The only thing she cares about is Russia. She's obsessed with that subject. She's upset. That's why she says, well, it belongs to, the people, whatever. We don't actually believe that for one moment. We never act in any way to suggest that somehow a piece of territory belongs to the people who live there. I mean, we certainly don't think that when we discuss, Bosnia and Herzegovina or Transnistria. We don't have to go through the whole list. But all she cares about is Russia, and so she's frightened here, getting very, very nervous that somehow the vaunted Allied unity, uppercase A, Allied, unity, is being undermined by this argument over Greenland. I don't care about goddamn Greenland. I want to wage war against Russia. So that's her. No threats or tariffs will change that. Our response must be to remain calm, hold our ground, and act in unity. And then she sends out another tweet. China and Russia must be having a field day. They are the ones who benefit from divisions among allies. Notice the upper A. Again, we're back with the uppercase A. If Greenland's security is at risk, we can address this inside NATO. Tariffs risk making Europe and the United States poorer and undermine our shared prosperity. We also cannot let our dispute distract us from the core task of helping to end Russia's war against Ukraine. Our core task, that's her core task. Um, and so this is bad news for her. She just wants to talk about Ukraine. How do we get our hands on Russia's sovereign assets? That's her shtick. Again, showing her respect for international law. How do we steal this money? How do we steal these boats, these vessels, these oil tankers that are flying under foreign flags? The international law be damned. Ursula von der Leyen, she's also been very busy. Arctic security can only be achieved together. This is why the proposed additional tariffs are a mistake, especially between long-standing allies. The EU and the US have agreed to a trade deal last July. A deal is a deal. And when friends shake hands, it must mean something. Well, not really. I mean, it doesn't really mean a great deal. As others have said, that countries don't have permanent friends and permanent enemies. They just simply have permanent interests. I think that's the point Trump is making. The United States has permanent national interests, doesn't have permanent allies and permanent enemies. So just simply talking about the allies, that doesn't cut it. And then here again, von der Leyen. I spoke to the NATO General Secretary, Macron, Keir Starmer, Schmerz, Giorgia Meloni. She didn't speak to me. Together, we stand firm in our commitment to uphold the sovereignty of Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. We will always protect our strategic and economic and security interests. We will face these challenges to our European solidarity with steadiness and resolve. Thank you so much. So that's the Europeans, not exactly presenting a very impressive front. One also has to remember that even among the European states, they really don't have a great deal of unity. Hungary obviously is always going to be on the side of the United States because obviously the personal relationship that Orban has with Trump. So that's now, if Orban loses the April election, that will change. Then the new government led by this Peter Magyar, will obviously sign with Brussels. But at the moment, Orban is with the United States. Poland also is with the United States, not because there's any love lost between the United States and Poland, but essentially Poland is always supporting the Americans because Poland is preoccupied with Russia. And, to fight Russia, which is what Poland is mostly interested in, you need the United States. So Poland does not think makes any sense at all to pick a fight with the United States over Greenland. So that's Poland now. So then the same goes to the Czech Republic, Slovakia. They despise Brussels. They're not going to take the side of Brussels against Washington. So they're out of the running. Then you've got the Baltic states. As I said, if you just with the Kaya Kalas, their obsession is Russia. So they don't care about Greenland. So they're going to be keeping with the Americans. So when you start looking at this, the map, who is with whom, then they're not even able. The Europeans are not going to field a united front. Contrary to the claims of von der Leyen, we must stay united. You're not united. So this is not going to go well. Now, it may be, with Trump. Trump is very mercurial, and Trump may change his mind and decide that he's going to do a deal. That's possible. But my point is that if Trump decides not to do a deal, he'll be on pretty solid ground, and the Europeans will be on very flimsy ground, and this is an argument he is going to win. Anyway, let's now turn to the Gaggles board. These are the I always mention it. These are the people who very generously keep the Gaggles community going, and above all, they maintain the dogs on an even keel. They manage to look after the dogs, make sure that the dogs don't feel left out, humiliated, unappreciated. So I really appreciate all of the members of the Gaggle community who help help the dogs. Doesn't matter about me, but it's the dogs that matter. Anyway, so first question is from Danaki, a good friend Danaki, who says, here we've lived to see a time. So he's quoting here Russian patriarch Kirill says, we've lived to see a time when the head of our state is truly orthodox, not by protocol, but by conviction. As a result of this truly orthodox leaders' actions, hundreds of thousands of Orthodox have died. Well, I mean, and obviously it's very, very sad. That's no question. However, I mean, what more can one expect from the patriarch Kirill? I mean, it's yeah, it's. I mean, it is a tragedy what has happened, and you know, we obviously we can debate the origins of this war and whether the actions that were taken in the circumstances of the time in February of 2022. I mean, as I imagine, and how would Patriarch Kirill argue? I mean, he would probably think that the decision that was taken then was the correct one. How it was implemented was a different matter. So that therefore Putin was justified in doing what he did. I mean, that's how I would imagine. I don't know. I can't speak for him, but he may raise the question as to whether, well, was if you're going to do this, this probably isn't the best way of doing it. So in fact, a more decisive and ruthless use of force would have would have actually delivered Russia on Russia's goals at ultimately at a much lower cost. And and then you ultimately, I mean, there are a lot of people here who are very critical of Trump, and it's understandable. I share the criticisms of Trump, but you have to feel that Trump probably would have acted in a much more decisive, ruthless way were he in Putin's shoes. I mean, he has certainly expressed his view that the way Russia's gone about this war has added no credit to Russia. It hasn't made Russia look strong. So I think that's I always feel that if you act a little bit more like the people you don't like, Trump or the Americans, would actually serve your purposes much better. Just like Trump's contempt for international law, which is very, obviously sounds very jarring. But at the same time, it's a much more accurate depiction of the world as it is, rather than these endless lectures that some Russian leaders go in for about international law and the UN Charter and whatnot, which persuade no one. They're a complete waste of time. No one is persuaded by them. So So I think that that's how I would think it. So yeah, obviously a tragedy um, in the circumstances of the time. I don't know what Russia could have done, but the way it was done, that's I think that's I think a different issue. Anyway, thank you so much. And and then Ergo says about responding to Denoki as a result of his actions to some extent, but these actions don't exist in a vacuum, and inaction has a cost too. Yeah, I agree. I mean, in those circumstances, inaction would have been wrong. But when you're going to take action, you have to, um, you have to act decisively, as Hamlet famously explained in his great soliloquy. Anyway, Cynthia, always very good to see you, Cynthia. Cynthia, I need hardly remind Gagglers, is a film scholar, film encyclopedist, film specialist who provides us with amazing insights and information and stories about the making of films. And every week when we have our screenings, Cynthia provides us with a wealth of really amazing observations and thoughts and comments and background information that we have absolutely no idea about. I certainly don't, even though I think I know something about a subject. That I'm always amazed by the additional information that Cynthia provides. So it's a rare treat for Gagglers that we have this film scholar among us who helps us out. And yesterday we screened um, part two of Eisenstein's Ivan the Terrible, and neither part one nor part two is exactly easy viewing. But that's true of the great literary classics. Then very few of them are easy reading, but it's always worth going through them because you derive so much benefit at the end. So Eisenstein was an extraordinary filmmaker. As I say, it's not for everybody, but and this was a cinematic masterpiece. But so if you have difficulties with it, there's no better guide to helping you understand what Eisenstein was trying to do than Cynthia. So please watch the films. It's free for all members of our community. Watch the films, and as you watch, read Cynthia's learned comments. Anyway, here's then is Cynthia says in 1931, Eisenstein went to Mexico to make a film funded by Upton Sinclair. A rumored affair with his male guide sparked a personal and artistic awakening, pushing him toward a more sensual style and highlighting the tension between his suppressed homosexuality and life under Stalin. Eisenstein famously compared himself to Oscar Wilde, and there's a quote: "If it were not for Marx and Lenin, he would have ended up as another Wilde, using ideology to shield his status." And then why does Wilde keep revisiting the Gaggle? Yeah, I think it's Robert who I think often provides us with quotes from Oscar Wilde. But who said that if it were not for Marx and Lenin, he would have ended up as another Oscar Wilde. Um, they the stories about Mexico are always a little murky. Um, there's obviously we have his sketches and we have his various notes, drawings, and so on, where his interest in homoeroticism is clear. Um, but I think it's what I think isn't entirely clear, at least from what I've read, but maybe others know more, is whether he really acted upon this or whether this was just more a kind of I don't know, sublimated longings or and so on. Um, Certainly, when he returned to the Soviet Union, which by then had taken a quite strict view of homosexuality, um, that sort of thing would have been absolutely prohibited. And one has to assume, since he was in Stalin's favor, that Stalin had no awareness of anything, um, any such interests in Eisenstein's past. However, and I think Cynthia certainly pointed this out. If you look at Ivan the Terrible, I mean, that has obviously a very strong homoerotic content, both in part one and in part two. I mean, so as we look at it now maybe when this was made in the 1940s, people weren't as keenly aware of any of homoerotic content as they are now, and that's true even when we look at um, older films in Hollywood. Now we think, God, well, that is so gay, but it somehow wasn't seen at the time as being so gay. So it's possible that Stalin kind of missed the homoerotic content of Ivan. Um, but it's I don't know to what extent Eisenstein really was, when you say Marx and Lenin, he was himself particularly influenced by the ideas of Marx and Lenin. I just you know Potemkin and the October, they're just their support for his revolution, which incidentally didn't have very much to do with Lenin. I mean, Lenin kind of battened onto that, but it didn't have that much to do with it. So it was more about revolution. I mean, which was on the cards in Russia. So. But I don't think it had too much Marxist content there. Um, and his aesthetic is it's much more of a part of the sort of European cinema, European expressionism, kind of very European abstraction. It certainly has no connection with the socialist realism that prevailed in Soviet cinema. So this was very much you know everything is aestheticized. There's abstraction. There's no drama there. There's no real character there. So it is much more in tune with the German expressionist cinema, or than anything to do with realism. So, um, but but I think people should make up their mind. There it is. It's available on the Gaggle, and it's there to be looked at. Anyway, Cynthia goes on. In part two of the film, Archbishop Pimen declares a dead martyr more dangerous than a living one, showing the moral power of the executed. Though set in 1569, it critiques Stalin's Great Purge. His mentor, Vsevolod Meyerhold, executed in 1940, gains symbolic invincibility. Eisenstein used Meyerhold's avant-garde techniques to portray a Tsar haunted by victims. Banned by Stalin and part three left unfinished by Eisenstein's death in 1948, it became a cinematic suicide note until its release in 1958. Um, well, I think there's something to that. One of the striking features, as Cynthia knows only too well, of part two of Ivan the Terrible is that Ivan, is now completely isolated. and he seems almost like a broken man. So he has absolute power. He's now in command in the way he wasn't in part one. So he runs Russia, and yet not only is he completely alone, but he's weighed down. He's weighed down by the burdens of power, and the burdens of having committed terrible things, terrible deeds against others. And so he's weighed down. He's still quite young, and yet he looks prematurely old. And he's rarely walking on his 2 feet. He's always almost crawling along the ground. He has a stick, so he needs a stick to move about. And so why is he so burdened? I think it's reasonable to assume that he feels burdened by the pain of having done a lot of cruel deeds, which makes him now alone and mistrustful of others, because he knows that not only is he alone, but there are many who want to kill him. So it's at no point does he feel secure, because at any moment his enemies could seize an opportunity to kill him. But but he is obviously burdened and weighed down by whether it's exactly feeling of guilt, but in some sense the burden of having done so many terrible things, and which have really left him alone with his thoughts and his tormented memories. So was that when went on in Stalin's mind? Maybe. Stalin was also very, very lonely, very isolated, particularly towards his last years, and also very mistrustful of everyone around him. So just the stories of his last years, clearly afraid, mistrustful of everybody around him, afraid, I think, obviously, of being assassinated. Um, and the remarkable thing, if you read about his very last days, it's before the discovery of his dead body, there seemed to be almost no one around him, completely alone. I mean, you think he's this one of the most powerful men in the world, and yet there's almost no one around him. Even he just has about one servant, a doctor, and no one around him, which of course leads one to think that it would have been quite easy to kill him. I mean, in circumstances when he's not surrounded by guards, it's easy opportunity for someone to have killed him. I don't know whether he was or wasn't murdered, but not it's certainly not impossible. And Ivan, of course, isn't murdered in the film, but of course he almost is. It's only because he sets up his cousin to dress like him, and then his cousin is murdered by accident because the killer thinks that he is Ivan. But that's almost like you need to be at all times aware that that you could be assassinated. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia, and then Ergo says opera is my favorite art. Yeah, the theme of the Tsar haunted in Ivan reminds me of the opera Boris Godunov. Was there any influence on Eisenstein? I'm sure. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm sure that's the case. It's an indelible part of Russian culture, and so it's quite possible that he was influenced by Godunov. But that is a great that's a great work. And I have mixed feelings about opera. I mean, I'm a huge, as people know, I'm a huge Wagner fan. I'm a huge fan of Richard Strauss. Um, I have difficulties with almost all Italian opera. And it just I don't know that all of that Verdi, Donizetti, Puccini just they leave me cold. I'm a big fan of Rossini, um, but not a huge fan of the French opera. And but 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 when it comes to the Germans, then I'm a big fan. So, well, Wagner obviously is the best, but I have a lot of time also for Mozart's operas. But Verdi and the rest, they just leave me cold. There's a kind of emptiness about it that it doesn't appeal to me. But I also think highly of the Russian operas. I like them. Anyway, Ergo says, I think Davos is gloomy on this Tuesday. I guess. I guess. Um, yeah, yeah. Anyway, and then Dennis Mister says, "Hi, Donald. Hi, Donald can't wait to give you a big hug when you arrive. Your chum Keir, yeah, two-tier Keir. Yes, I think that's it. That's the I think that's the given the notes that he exchanged with uh, with with um, with Macron, and the lovey-dovey note that he exchanged with with Mark Rutte. Can't wait to see you. Or whatever. It's I can see the two. But Keir is a very he's kind of a cold fish. I don't see Keir writing notes like "Can't wait to see you." That's just not his style. Um, can't wait to give you a big hug. I don't know. He's just not. He's kind of a cold, rather cold person, Keir. Um, anyway, then here's then Marty. Always good to see you, Marty. And so Marty, I was wondering how Marty would introduce himself. So he's got the fancy glasses. Do we know who the designer of those glasses is? I don't know. They're very fancy, and Macron generally likes very fancy stuff. He wears very fancy watches, he wears fancy suits, he has fancy haircuts. Everything about him is quite fancy and expensive. So I imagine, and those glasses look quite pricey. So I just wonder who's the designer of those glasses. And Marty says the eyes are the windows to the soul. Merry Tuesday, George and Gagglers. So that is, I think, attributed to Kafka. The eyes are the windows of the soul. But I'm not sure Kafka actually did say that. I mean, that it's always attributed to him, but I don't know where exactly he's supposed to have said that. But it's a nice expression. Um, but I guess if the eyes are the windows of the soul, then that's not a if that's your soul, that's not a good look. Anyway, thank you so much, Marty. And now Cynthia says, apropos of good enough. From what I've read, Eisenstein's Ivan the Terrible really plays like a visual opera. Yeah, I think so. Inspired by the lonely Tsar of Godunov, he originally wanted to film Boris, and he brought its mood of paranoia and absolute power straight into his Ivan. You can hear that influence in Prokofiev's score. Yeah, I agree with that. Drawn from an abandoned Boris project with its theatrical staging and figures like the Holy Fool, the film turns history into a tragic reflection on power and isolation. Yeah, I think that's very well put. I think that's exactly what it is. It's about power and isolation, and so the tragedy of it is that, yes, Part one, he's seeking to establish um, his the monarchy, and trying to bring all the peoples into of Russia into that state, and establishing the authority of the state over the people, and above all against the boyars, who refused to accept the rule of the Tsar. Um, and then in part two, where he's now established his rule, and seemingly he has no further challenges. He's almost like a broken man, and so and he's broken and isolated, and so it's a it is a tragic figure. So it's not a tragedy in the sense of Shakespearean tragedy, or even the sense of the classical Greek tragedy, but it is the tragedy of absolute power. So anyway, Cynthia puts it all very well. Anyway, Cynthia goes on. This is a separate issue. So Cynthia says Pascal Lautel's detailed Trump's Board of Peace on his show, calling it essentially his own international fiefdom. He appoints the executive board. Rubio, Witkoff, Kushner, Blair controls membership and succession, and manages funds with immunity from all laws, domestic and international. He also built a kill switch, allowing him to dissolve it all at will, and Gaza is merely a sideshow for him. His Board of Peace is even designed to become hereditary, and passing it on to his family. And any thoughts on this? Yeah, I do actually have thoughts on this. In fact, I wanted to talk about the Board of Peace. Let me actually pull this up, because it's let me just that because it's a kind of an interesting story. I I don't wholly. I mean, this is where I think I differ, is that I don't exactly. I'm not as negative about it as others, because we are at least moving towards a phase two. I remember everyone had said there will be no phase two, and but now with let me just this thing. This is not, it's not user friendly, but let me just now finally have it here. Yeah, okay. I think I have it. So yeah, let me just pull up this the issue of this Board of Peace. So the exact tasks of this Board of Peace are a little unclear. Supposedly, it has overall control over Gaza. So the way they've presented it. So here's the Bloomberg story. So you have the Board of Peace, on which sit various heads of government, heads of state, and then you have to. Well, you don't have to pay $1 billion. I mean, the way at the moment, I mean, things could change, but at the moment, if you pay $1 billion, then you're there for life. That gives you a seat on the board for life. If you don't pay, then Trump invites you, and you're there for 3 years, and then after 3 years you leave. But if you want to stay on, then you have to pay $1 billion. And so Trump has now invited innumerable leaders from around the world, including, as the media reported, including Putin, including Lukashenko, and then of course Erdogan, Sisi, and they're all invited to be on this board. And of course, Trump will be the chairman of the board. But it isn't clear at this stage. I mean, maybe it'll become clearer. Does Trump continue to be chairman of the board after he ceases to be president? So that I think needs sorting out. But that's just the board. But underneath it, there's some committees, executive committees, and then underneath the executive committees, there is the Palestinian government of technocrats, and the Palestinian committee of technocrats, I think there are 15 of them. They supposedly have executive powers over Gaza. The problem for them is that, yeah, you have a committee, but you don't have, at the moment, you don't really have a civil service staff who can implement the decisions of that committee of technocrats. So you have, but that committee will be overseen by, executive boards, so that you have some, you have this executive committee, the one that Tony Blair is on, and then there's one dealing with finance and investment. So at the moment, it's all very vague as to how this whole thing is going to work. But what I said a moment ago, that I'm not as negative about it as Pascal, is that we actually got here. I mean, remember, everyone said that we're not going to get this. We're not going to have a phase two. This was absolutely said. Everyone was convinced we're not going to have a phase two. We just have a phase one, and then Israel will relaunch its offensive. The project being the expulsion of all of the Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank, and that's just a matter of time before Israel does this. And it's possible Israel will do it, but that's not what's happening. I mean, we're now into phase two. All these committees have now been set up. It's going to be quite hard for Israel simply to relaunch its offensive, given so many other countries are now involved in this. I mean, you're going to have Trump himself, who is the chairman of the board, and then you have all of the various Middle East powers. You have powers from other countries. So the more people that you get involved, the harder it will become for Israel simply to cancel everything and restart the war. So that's why I look upon it as more positively. I mean, is it delivering on Palestinian self-determination? No, of course it isn't. Of course it isn't. But did anyone really think that the United States will suddenly become serious about Palestinian self-determination? I mean, what one can hope for is at least a modicum of life for the Palestinians, so that they can actually live in some ways with some semblance of normality. I don't know if that's going to happen, but at least that's something. And I think that if that does happen, then that's something we should be reasonably happy about, rather than just sort of quibbling and saying, oh, it's all about Trump and money and so on. And it's not clear where this money is going to go. I mean, if they put in $1 billion, I guess if the Board of Peace members will put in $1 billion, that money will go to reconstruction. I mean, it's not going to go to Trump. I mean, it'll go for reconstruction. Anyway, it says Trump wants the full constitution and remit of the committee signed in Davos on Thursday. So we'll see if that happens. And then it says Trump is demanding about the $1 billion. And then it says potential members of the board began to filter out over the weekend. Invitees include world leaders from Mark Carney to Erdogan. It's not clear who has so far accepted, incidentally. I think Viktor Orban has accepted, Putin is still thinking about it. Macron has said that he's not going to take part. And then he says much of the concern centers on the wording of the Peace Board's charter, which appears to place its ultimate decision-making power with Trump. That raises many questions, not least over where the payments for long-term membership would go. Well, as I say, I think it's going to be, the idea will be, to invest in Gaza. I mean, I don't think it's going to go into Trump's hotels. European allies are working to modify the terms and coordinate a response. And then it goes on. So far, only Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly pushed back against the proposal. While he's in favor of the Board of Peace as a concept, his office said the makeup of a separate Gaza committee serving under the board was not coordinated with Israel and runs contrary to its policy. Well, this is Trump's plan. This is his part of his 20-point plan. They don't have to coordinate with Israel. And then others suggested they'd seek changes. Carney said that while he's up for joining the board, in principle, the terms would need to be discussed. And Javier Milei, Trump likes him, so he's on the board. And then we have privately senior European officials are more strongly critical. Several told Bloomberg they saw it as a clear attempt by Trump to set up a rival or replacement for the United Nations, a body of which he has been a long-standing critic. Now, I've been reading this, and I think that's all kind of silly, to be frank. I mean, this isn't going to be, no one's going to join this as a rival to the United Nations. I mean, the only power that is hostile to the United Nations is the United States. No one else, is going to want to join an alternative to the UN. I mean, Sisi's not going to do it. Erdogan's not going to agree to it. None of the Arab states will do it. So only the United States and Israel would like to set up an alternative body to the United Nations. So that's not going to happen. This isn't an alternative. So, but the more members you get, the more unwieldy it is. I mean, basically, it's like, what is it going to do? What is this board actually going to do? I mean, you've got so many countries involved who have no interest in the Middle East, that it becomes, the important issue is, of course, the whether the technocrats, those Palestinian technocrats, will be able to govern Gaza. And of course, there's the issue of the security force. And then here we have Viktor Orban, who's going to be on, and then Putin has been invited. Who's invited? So they said, Albania, Argentina, Australia, Bahrain, Brazil, Belarus, they've been invited. Canada, Cyprus, Egypt, European Commission, Finland, Greece, so on. They've all been invited. So we don't know yet who is accepted. And then Italy, Jordan, Kazakhstan, Norway, Pakistan, Russia, Thailand, Turkey, UK, Uzbekistan, Vietnam. And then here's the 1 billion that they need to pay. And the board is described in the charter as an international organization that seeks to promote stability, restore dependable and lawful governance, and secure enduring peace in areas affected by threatened by conflict. Trump would also be responsible for approving the group's official seal, and then and then it says the draft appears to suggest Trump himself would control the money, something that will be considered unacceptable to most countries. And then the Board of Peace would convene voting meetings at least annually at such additional times and locations as the chairman deems appropriate. The agenda would be subject to approval by the chairman. The Peace Board would hold regular non-voting meetings with its executive board. And then Trump would also have the power to remove a member subject to a veto by 2/3 majority of member states. Now, and then here is Haaretz's account of this. and says the Board of Peace is expected to be structured hierarchically. At its top, where Trump would sit, and then alongside leaders of Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar, and then as well as leaders of UK and France. Well, that's already gone. France and there. Haaretz has learned that Germany was also asked to join, and then at the second level would be the Board of Peace's Executive Committee. This is where it starts getting complicated. So the second level, we have the Board of Peace's Executive Committee, under which the Gaza Executive Board would operate. The Gaza Executive Board officials would be responsible for day-to-day coordination with the Palestinian Technocratic Committee. And then we have the Bulgarian diplomat Mladenov will serve as the Gaza Executive Board's high representative, who would act as the on-ground link between the Palestinian Committee and the Executive Board. And then we have this. The White House has appointed Major General Jasper Jeffries, as the commander of the International Stabilization Force. And then, so anyway, that's the. And I wanted to show also. Then we got all sorts of, fat cats. Mark Rowan, CEO of Apollo Global Management, he'll be involved. World Bank President AJ Bango is involved, and then they say the White House has also announced the composition of the Gaza Executive Board, which is set to operate under the Board of Peace. This committee would include Witkoff, Kushner, Blair, Mladenov, Rowan, he's that Apollo private equity firm, and then as well as Israeli businessman Yeke Gabayev, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, Qatari official, Egypt's head of intelligence, and now you have Netanyahu, who seems very unhappy. Netanyahu criticizes Trump over the Gaza board peace staffing, says he was not consulted, and then here is the way Haaretz has actually presented it, this hierarchy, the bureaucratic hierarchy. So here's the Board of Peace, comprised of heads of state invited by Trump. Trump chairs the board, and its votes and decisions will be subject to his approval. Terms will be limited to 3 years and will be renewable with his approval, except for countries that contribute more. Okay, that's the Board of Peace. Then we have the Executive Board, members Witkoff, Kushner, Rubio, Blair, this Rowan, and then World Bank President, and then U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor Robert Gabriel. That's the Executive Board. And then we have the Office of the High Representative. That's the Mladenov who acts as the liaison between this committee, or rather between the Executive Board and the Palestinian Committee of Technocrats. So he's the on-ground link between the Board of Peace and the administration of Gaza. And then we have the Executive Board. Gaza Executive Board will support the Office of the High Representative, and that's where you got all the rest of, Rowan and so on. So they've made it a little bit confusing. That's not correct, the way they present. And then we have the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. That's the technocrats. The Technocratic Committee, made up of Palestinians, overseen by the Office of the High Representative. That's the Bulgarian guy, Mladenov. Dr. Nabil Ali Shat, who previously served as Deputy Transportation Minister in the Palestinian Authority, will lead this committee. It is unclear whether the new administration will enjoy real freedom of action or broad public legitimacy. Anyway, so that's roughly what the plan is. As I say, this is so far. This is just stuff written down on paper. I mean, they don't have any reality at this stage. As I said a moment ago, the reason why I'm less dismissive than is Pascal, that that this is who'd have thunk that we got this far? So it was all everything was dismissed. Oh, it's not going to happen. This is just going to be Israel is just going to go and relaunch its offensive. But it is happening. It may not work out, but this is quite an elaborate. As you can see, this is a complicated plan, which is going to be quite difficult for Israel to worm itself out of this. Now, of course, they could do it, but it's not the same as Oslo, because Oslo was between Israel and Fatah, with the United States acting as mediator. Well, of course, that was very easy for Israel, simply to uh, do whatever it wanted. But in this case, it's going to be a little more difficult, because there's so many other countries are now involved, and Israel would have to defy all of them, and then of course they would have to defy the United States, because now Trump is quite wedded to the idea. He's the chairman of the board. You're the chairman of the board. You're not going to want employees doing whatever the hell that they want. So um, obviously we're going to have to wait and see. But I think a lot of people are being very dismissive, and I think it's much too early to be dismissive. I mean, there are positive aspects to this, and there's another positive aspect, is that Hamas has in part accepted all of this, and I think that's a significant development. I mean, we can talk about that next time, but Hamas has um, accepted the Palestinian Committee, the Technocrat Committee, as that they are the governing body in Gaza, and they've accepted the Board of Peace. So if you've got Hamas now, they haven't accepted disarmament, but they have accepted certain aspects of disarmament. They're willing to give up their arms, and then they would be decommissioned, which means that they would have access to the arms should the ceasefire break down. So, in other words, they would be buried, and somebody would have the keys or whatever. And then, if the ceasefire breaks down, they can have access to those arms. That's something very different than from the other plan, which Hamas obviously would never accept, which is, hey, you surrender your weapons to Israel, just give up your weapons, and that's fine. That obviously Hamas is never going to accept that. But some arrangement whereby a third party can keep these weapons under lock and key, and that if the ceasefire breaks down, Hamas can have access to the arms. Something like that is doable. Anyway, so here's Richard Phillips. So we discussed it earlier. Then Richard Phillips, yeah, in comparison to dropping 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, murdering hundreds of thousands of people, this is nothing a real genocide that the Americans still pretend is justified. Yeah, well, I think the Americans don't give it too much thought, to be honest. I mean, it's not something that Americans are exactly tormented about, which tells you something. I mean, it's like, well, we did it, and we succeeded. Because ultimately they'll say, well, we succeeded. I mean, we're not going to shed too many tears, and that's that's the way of the world. I mean, in international affairs, sadly, nothing succeeds like success. And you say, hey, we pulled it off, and now it's over. And hey, I mean, that's what the argument that I was making in the days after the seizure of Maduro. I mean, obviously, I don't approve of it. I think it was a horrible thing to do. It's an obvious violation of international law. But the Americans will turn around and say, "Yeah, we did it. We succeeded," and that's what counts when it comes to raison d'etat, reasons of state. When you start a war and then you have no idea how to end, that's bad. You're not helping your side. If you act ruthlessly, cruelly, inhumanely, but you at least bring it to a swift conclusion, and it's successful, then hey, then that's you, you walk away from that. So that's my view. Um, um, and Rich says, I'm English and I kind of semi agree that Argentina had a reasonable case. This is about the Falklands, but might makes rights, which is basically what you're saying. I'm not saying might. That's not what I say. Might makes right. What I said doesn't make it right. What I said that in international affairs, might prevails. I didn't say it makes right, but might prevails. It always has, and it always will for the foreseeable future. And there's no point in pretending that somehow states sit there and think about international law and think about UN Security Council resolutions and so on. You bring that up when you think that it's useful for your argument. When you don't think it's useful for your argument, then you just ignore it and just use whatever force is necessary. So the Western powers, when they talk about international law, which they don't actually, they talk about rules-based order. They use a different formulation. They think it works in their favor. Then when you bring up, yeah, but what about your invasion of Iraq? How was that in any way in accordance with any rules-based order? They just sort of smirk about it and say, yeah, well, that was a long time ago. No point in arguing about this now. So that's it. There's your argument. Anyway, I think I made my point there. And then Richard, then thank you so much, Richard, for your the contribution. And they said, hopefully this will help you stop the dogs from complaining too much. Well, that's not. They like to complain. Although being a European cultural elite, you're probably feeding them the finest beef filet mignon. Yeah, and I wouldn't do that. I mean, I don't eat the finest beef filet mignon. I'm not going to give it to dogs, and especially if specialist food. Maybe that's why they are so demanding. Well, yeah. I'm not one of those people who thinks that dogs should be um, given food that's good enough for humans. I just don't think they should eat that well. Anyway, thank you so much, Richard. And then Vic Shakapopoulos says, Dear George, please never again use the expression the patriarchate in Istanbul like you did last week. It made my ears bleed. It is the unique circumstances where it is safe to use the name in Constantinople. I guess you can also say the patriarchate of Constantinople in Istanbul if you don't want to upset the Turks. No, I think, that's fair. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, not Istanbul. I mean, it's, sometimes when you do these things, you don't always use the most precise language. I mean, you just you have to answer questions, and sometimes you don't use the exact expression. But you're right; it's the Patriarchate of Constantinople. That's yeah. But but somehow because you always think automatically Constantinople is Istanbul. That I said that, but I take your point. It's the Patriarchate of Constantinople, and your point is well taken. Thank you. Um, and Richard Phillips says, I'm from London. If you want an interesting conversation, ask a Turk what he thinks of the idea of Kurdistan. I did it once innocently, and he literally spat at my feet. Very respectable, nice guy as well. Yeah, no, I'm sure that's right. Okay, and then we have NKMRD says the issue with interest-based politics is that some nations could have the interest to delete all other nations on the planet. It's a dead end. It's an old school thinking. There's no future in this. Meanwhile, globalists win and win and win. Well, in theory, of course, yes. One state can think about deleting all other states. It's unlikely to happen, but yeah, in principle, you can create these international bodies such as the United Nations, um, the 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 purpose of which is to allow smaller nations some say in their destiny and allow them to prevail in in the world of geopolitics, so that their interests are taken into consideration and they don't get pushed around by the great powers. And that's the purpose of the international institutions, that is the United Nations, which recognizes the sovereign equality of states. All states are equal, from the greatest to the smallest. Okay, and that's good. And by doing that, United Nations serves a purpose. In that, any state can come forward, make its pitch, and try to win the support of other states, and indeed the support of the great powers. Now, the reason, however, why the United Nations has succeeded, and it's now been around for 80 years, and why the League of Nations failed, is that the United Nations put in a caveat, which is the great powers, the permanent members of the UN Security Council. By recognizing the inherent rights and privileges of the great powers, the UN became a working concern, because as long as you accept that great powers have certain prerogatives that other powers don't have, and as long as you accept that you just can't mess on the issues that really matter to them, then the United Nations can work, and then the great powers will continue to take part in the United Nations. But if you didn't do that, if you just insisted, oh no, or the sovereign equality of states, and we can just simply condemn the actions of one of the great powers, and indeed we can organize the United Nations against one of the great powers, then the United Nations would fail, and just as the League of Nations failed. Because then the great powers would just walk away and say, well, what do I want to take part in this for? I can get my way by force. I don't have to accept the rights of others to criticize what I do. I don't have to sit and listen to their condemnations. I just do whatever I want. But that's not what happens. And instead, the United Nations, and I think it's been why it's one with great successes. It says, okay, we have a kind of a two-tier system. We do recognize the sovereign equality of all states. We outlaw aggression, but we have a second tier, which is the Security Council. And within that Security Council, we have the 5 permanent members. And the 5 permanent members, essentially, determine what happens, in the world order. And those 5 permanent members have the right of veto. Nobody else has that. They are given the right of veto because they are powerful enough to demand that right, and that you don't, in any way, shape, or form, mess with vital interests of those great powers. And that's the success of the UN. So when you say it's a dead end, it's not really a dead end. If you recognize the national interests of the great powers, then you've got a working relationship. You've got a working system, which is the working system of international relations. If you don't, then I think you're not going to get anywhere. So, yeah, states act in accordance with their national interests, but some states get to ensure that their interests will prevail, and some states don't. And in this case, we have Denmark, The problem that Denmark has is that it's dependent on the great power with which it is in conflict. The United States runs NATO. The United States uses Danish territory, both Denmark proper and Greenland, for its military and security interests. And Denmark wants the United States to wage this proxy war against Russia. Why Denmark has decided on this, we're not very sure, but that's what Denmark has decided. Well, once you've done that, you've kind of fatally compromised your situation. And that's why, in this argument between Denmark and the United States, when the United States says to Denmark, well, if you want us to do all of those things for you, we want you to, you want us to take care of security in Europe, if you want us to wage a proxy war against Russia, if you want us to do all this nice military stuff on Greenland, you're going to have to pay a price. And you know, in comparison with what other things that the United States has done in recent years, this is kid stuff. And so, that's why I think this whole hysteria is just so phony. I mean, the Chagos Islands we were just talking about, they were just picked up lock, stock, and barrel and just dumped somewhere. Boom, you're gone. And no one's out saying that to the Greenlanders. So, I don't know. It's all kind of somewhat absurd. Anyway, Anne Marie, it's so good to see you. I'm so happy you were able to join us. This is Anne Marie, who's, as I always say, our resident musical expert, musical scholar, and an outstanding professional musician who plays in outstanding orchestras and manages to find the time to be here on the Gaggle. Works with the finest composers of our time, the finest conductors, the finest musicians, and then provides us with really insightful and fascinating information about contemporary music, or even not so contemporary music, but at least contemporary performances, and all of the issues that are involved in the musical performance at the highest international level. And it's stuff that I'm always fascinated by. I'm always so envious of people who are able to perform at that level. So I'm so grateful that Anne Marie is here and provides us often with such interesting and informative comments on the music that we play here. So thank you so much, Anne Marie. Thank you for your generosity and for all of your really outstanding comments. Dennis Misty says, thank you, Dennis, says, enjoyed your chat with Paul Craig Roberts, thank you, a week or so ago. Yeah, he had an endearing chuckle as he considers Vladimir Putin's inaction to extreme provocation. No, I enjoyed it as well. The funny thing is that I first met Paul Craig Roberts many, many, many years ago. I don't want to spell out how many years ago, but rest assured, it was a long time ago. I was an editor then at the Times Literary Supplement, and he was one of the writers that I brought on to the TLS. So I was his editor, and then I met him. I visited him in Washington, and what I find so extraordinary about him is he's hardly changed. He is, other people after so many years, they age. He hasn't aged at all. He's exactly the same, looks exactly the same now as he did then. He talks in exactly the same way. His voice hasn't changed in any way. It's just uncanny. And so endearing chuckle, he had all of that. And he always had that somewhat intense manner. Yet that when I met him, so I always just find it very heartening when decades go by, and somebody just simply doesn't change at all. I don't know how that happens, but 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 it's true of him. So it's there's a trace of immortality about him. Anyway, I'm glad you like it, and thank you for your generosity. Um, Richard Phillips says, talking of Hamlet, can your group go and watch Hamlet? I have absolutely no intention of doing so. It looks awful. Well, we might have the Olivier Hamlet. I don't particularly want the Kenneth Branagh Hamlet. But we could do the Olivier Hamlet. So it's a thought. And Enke Merda says Hamlet. I enjoyed watching and reading. It was very mystical, and there were witches and a ghost, which I liked. So that's it's a great work. And then Enke Merda goes on. In the end, Hamlet was school literature. In my case, much comes down to the enthusiasm of the teacher. No, I think so. But I think when you read the classics, and I think at least in my experiences, there's a limit to how much benefit you derive from it when you read it in school. I mean, you get something out of it. And I think that it's more important that it 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 plants seeds in you, and then you get to appreciate it much more in later years. So I think that's it. So Hamlet, much of it when you first read it, you get some benefit from it, but I think it's something that you savor and learn from in later years. And I think that's true of all of the great literary masterpieces, and Shakespeare's as well as everybody else's. Um, so yeah. Ergo says my current favorite opera is Die Tote Stadt. I should hope you like it, George. I don't know it, so I don't know it at all. So I'm going to look it up and and tell you what I think. And maybe we can even post it on the if I like it to put on the Gaggle Music Club. So, but anyway, thank you for the suggestion. And then NKMRD says, well, I agree that in practical terms, we never saw one nation or one group taking over everything and determining the way of an entire planet. We are not used to this, but I see things from a technological lens, and it is scary what can be done with 0 and 1 to control citizens once you have digital currency. I think the dimensions change, and I find it scary. Well, that's all true. Now, in terms of taking things over, I mean, the Allied powers pretty much took over everything from Germany and Japan. I mean, every single thing. And when you look back on that, the Germans, and to a lesser extent the Japanese, should really breathe a sigh of relief, because when you surrender unconditionally and entirely leave the fate of your nation into the hands of others who really hate you, others who despise you, filled with loathing after so many years of war. When your entire existence is now dependent on others, others who hate you, you are very lucky to stay alive. You are very lucky to continue to exist. And of course, there were people within the United States who indeed wanted to make sure that Germans as a people cease to exist. Roosevelt famously suggested, castrating all German males. Then we had the Morgenthau Plan, which basically, to destroy everything in Germany, in industry and everything. So it's touch and go that the Germans have survived what could have been truly a catastrophe for them. Anyway, and Anne Marie says this. I played this opera. This is a Die Tote Stadt. I played this opera a long time ago. Unfortunately, can't really remember. Okay, well, this is quite intriguing, and I'm going to have to look this up. What Die Tote Stadt is, and and see where we can take it. Anyway, my time is up, and was actually up some time ago. So I appreciate everybody who joined us. I appreciate all of the really interesting comments and criticisms and debates, arguments that were offered. Appreciate all the musical and the cinematic commentary and analysis. Adds a certain cultural allure to these evenings. So thank you for that. The dogs, of course, are going to raise the issue of the tip jar. And when they raise the issue, they just take it out on me. I mean, they just raise it and they raise their voices against me. So that's my burden. But thank you everybody who has who contributed to the tip jar. Really appreciate it, even if the dogs don't. And we'll be back on Thursday, the same time, 3 p.m. Eastern time. So look forward to seeing you all then. Until Thursday, all the best. Good night.